Question 1. The audit findings indicate potential discrepancies in the financial reporting of the Yokohama Rubber Company's overseas subsidiaries, specifically concerning the recognition of revenue. Management is concerned about the immediate impact on quarterly earnings and the potential for increased scrutiny from investors. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Yokohama Rubber Company? Option A. Instruct the audit team to revise their report to reflect a more favorable interpretation of the revenue recognition practices, focusing on the potential for future revenue growth to offset current concerns. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive, independent review of the audit findings, engaging internal audit and relevant compliance officers to verify the discrepancies and assess their impact against Japanese accounting standards and internal control policies. Option C. Immediately implement cost-cutting measures across all departments to demonstrate proactive financial management and divert attention from the audit findings. Option D. Disclose the audit findings to a limited group of senior executives and await further direction before taking any public or internal action. Correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive, independent review of the audit findings, engaging internal audit and relevant compliance officers to verify the discrepancies and assess their impact against Japanese accounting standards and internal control policies. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial pressures with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The audit findings suggest potential non-compliance, which, if not addressed appropriately, could lead to significant reputational damage, legal penalties, and loss of stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to determine the most responsible and compliant course of action. The correct approach involves a thorough, independent investigation into the audit findings, prioritizing factual accuracy and adherence to the Yokohama Rubber Company's internal policies and relevant Japanese regulations. This approach is best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct. By initiating a detailed review, the company signals its seriousness in addressing potential issues and its dedication to upholding regulatory standards. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the integrity of financial reporting and operations, aligning with the principles of corporate governance expected under Japanese law and industry best practices. An approach that involves downplaying the audit findings and focusing solely on immediate cost-saving measures is professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to acknowledge and address potential noncompliance, thereby risking further regulatory scrutiny and penalties. It also demonstrates a disregard for the integrity of financial reporting and internal controls, which are fundamental ethical and legal requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately implement punitive measures against the audit team without a proper review of their findings. This undermines the independence and effectiveness of the audit function, creating a climate of fear and discouraging future critical assessments. Such an action could be seen as an attempt to suppress unfavorable information, which is ethically unsound and potentially violates principles of good corporate governance and employee rights under Japanese labor law. A third incorrect approach would be to selectively share the audit findings with only a select group of senior management, without a broader communication strategy or plan for remediation. This lack of transparency can lead to misinformed decision-making and can be perceived as an attempt to conceal issues, damaging trust among employees and stakeholders. It also fails to leverage the collective expertise within the company to develop comprehensive solutions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and ethical approach. This involves 1. Understanding the nature and scope of the audit findings. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations, specifically Japanese corporate law and accounting standards. 3. Conducting a thorough, objective investigation to verify the findings. 4. Developing a remediation plan based on verified facts, ensuring compliance and ethical conduct. 5. Communicating findings and actions appropriately to relevant stakeholders. This structured process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the company's commitment to integrity and compliance. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of regulatory scrutiny regarding the sourcing of certain raw materials used in the Yokohama Rubber Company's manufacturing processes. A proposed cost-saving initiative, suggests utilizing a new, less expensive supplier whose sourcing practices are not yet fully vetted against current industry standards. The head of procurement is eager to implement this change to meet quarterly targets. What is the most responsible course of action for a compliance officer at the Yokohama Rubber Company? Option A. Approve the cost-saving initiative, assuming the risk of regulatory scrutiny is low and that the procurement department will manage any minor issues that arise. Option B. Immediately halt the proposed cost-saving initiative and request a comprehensive audit of the new supplier's sourcing practices, engaging the legal and compliance departments to ensure adherence to all relevant regulations before any decision is made. Option C. Inform the head of procurement that the initiative cannot proceed due to the risk matrix without further investigation or consultation. Option D. Proceed with the cost-saving initiative, but instruct the procurement department to be discreet about the new supplier to avoid attracting attention. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the proposed cost-saving initiative and request a comprehensive audit of the new supplier's sourcing practices, engaging the legal and compliance departments to ensure adherence to all relevant regulations before any decision is made. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet targets can lead to overlooking potential compliance issues, which could have severe consequences for the Yokohama Rubber Company, including financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are not only profitable, but also compliant with the relevant regulatory framework for the Yokohama Rubber Company's operations. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential compliance risks before they escalate. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, which is paramount for sustainable business operations. Specifically, engaging with the legal and compliance departments to thoroughly assess the implications of the proposed cost-saving measures and to develop compliant alternatives aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible corporate governance. This proactive stance ensures that the Yokohama Rubber Company operates within the bounds of the law and maintains its integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the cost-saving measures without proper due diligence, assuming that the potential risks are negligible. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory requirements and ethical standards, potentially exposing the Yokohama Rubber Company to significant legal and financial repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term cost savings over long-term compliance, which can lead to a culture of corner-cutting and ultimately undermine the company's reputation and operational stability. Ignoring the advice of the compliance department or attempting to circumvent established procedures also represents a failure in professional judgment and a breach of ethical conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to the Yokohama Rubber Company's business. 2. Identifying potential risks associated with any proposed action. 3. Consulting with relevant internal departments, legal, compliance, finance, to evaluate these risks. 4. Developing and implementing strategies that mitigate risks and ensure compliance. 5. Continuously monitoring and reviewing processes to maintain adherence to regulations and ethical standards. Question 3. The audit findings indicate potential inconsistencies in the documentation process for raw material procurement at the Yokohama Rubber Company. Specifically, the audit highlighted instances where supplier certifications were not consistently attached to purchase orders, raising concerns about adherence to quality control and import regulations. Which of the following represents the most appropriate immediate response to these audit findings? Option A. Instruct the procurement team to immediately begin attaching all available supplier certifications to new purchase orders, assuming the past issues were isolated incidents. Option B. Advise the audit team that the inconsistencies are minor and unlikely to have significant regulatory implications, suggesting a focus on other areas. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive review of all recent raw material procurement documentation, cross-referencing supplier certifications with purchase orders to identify the full scope of the issue and its root cause, and subsequently develop a targeted corrective action plan. Option D. Temporarily halt all raw material procurement until a full investigation can be completed, without a clear plan for resolution. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive review of all recent raw material procurement documentation, cross-referencing supplier certifications with purchase orders to identify the full scope of the issue and its root cause, and subsequently develop a targeted corrective action plan. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with the long-term implications of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The audit findings suggest potential deviations from established procedures, necessitating a careful and informed response that upholds the integrity of the Yokohama Rubber Company's operations and its commitment to regulatory adherence. The pressure to resolve issues quickly must not compromise thoroughness or ethical considerations. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the audit findings, followed by a detailed investigation into the root causes of any identified discrepancies. This approach prioritizes understanding the extent of the issue and its implications before implementing corrective actions. It aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, ensuring that the Yokohama Rubber Company addresses potential risks proactively and transparently. This methodical process is crucial for maintaining stakeholder trust and avoiding future compliance breaches. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate superficial fixes without understanding the underlying causes risks masking systemic problems, potentially leading to recurring issues and more significant compliance failures. This approach neglects the investigative duty inherent in responding to audit findings and fails to address the root of the problem, thereby not truly resolving the issue and potentially exposing the Yokohama Rubber Company to further regulatory scrutiny. Another incorrect approach that involves ignoring or downplaying the audit findings is a direct contravention of ethical and regulatory obligations. Such an approach demonstrates a lack of accountability and a disregard for the importance of internal controls and external oversight. This can lead to severe consequences, including reputational damage, financial penalties, and legal repercussions for the Yokohama Rubber Company. It signifies a failure to uphold professional standards and a potential breach of duty to the company and its stakeholders. A further incorrect approach that involves implementing corrective actions without proper consultation or validation risks introducing new errors or failing to address the actual problem effectively. This can lead to wasted resources, continued noncompliance, and a loss of confidence in the company's ability to manage its operations effectively. It bypasses essential due diligence and collaborative problem-solving, which are critical for robust and sustainable solutions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the situation, including the specific regulatory context applicable to the Yokohama Rubber Company. This involves gathering all relevant information, assessing potential risks and impacts, and consulting with relevant internal and external stakeholders. The framework should prioritize ethical considerations and regulatory compliance, ensuring that all actions taken are defensible, transparent, and aimed at achieving long-term operational integrity and adherence to all applicable laws and guidelines. Question 4. Quality control measures reveal a minor but consistent deviation from the specified material composition in a batch of rubber compounds destined for Yokohama Rubber Company's premium tire line. While the deviation is currently within the company's historical tolerance range for minor variations, it is approaching the upper limit of the acceptable specification. The production manager is concerned about potential delays if the batch is rejected and suggests proceeding with its use, arguing that the deviation is not significant enough to impact immediate performance and that a full investigation can be conducted later. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the quality assurance team in this situation? Option A. Inform the production manager that the batch will be used, but flag it for closer monitoring during the manufacturing process, with a plan to address any performance issues that arise post-sale. Option B. Halt production of the affected batch immediately, initiate a full root cause analysis to understand the deviation, and document all findings and corrective actions, while also assessing the need for external notification based on the potential long-term implications. Option C. Proceed with using the batch as planned, as the deviation is within the historical tolerance range, and schedule a review of the quality control process at a later date to prevent future occurrences. Option D. Reject the batch outright and demand a complete resourcing of the raw materials, without further investigation into the cause of the deviation to ensure absolute adherence to the specification. Correct answer is B. Halt production of the affected batch immediately. Initiate a full root cause analysis to understand the deviation, and document all findings and corrective actions, while also assessing the need for external notification based on the potential long-term implications. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing immediate production demands with long-term product integrity and regulatory compliance. The discovery of a potential defect in a critical component for Yokohama Rubber Company's products necessitates a careful and ethical response. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action when a deviation from quality standards is identified, impacting both customer safety and the company's reputation. Judgment is required to assess the severity of the defect, the potential risks, and the most responsible way to address the issue without compromising established protocols or misleading stakeholders. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation and transparent communication. This means immediately halting production of the affected batch, conducting a comprehensive root cause analysis to understand the defect's origin, and then implementing corrective actions. Crucially, it requires informing relevant internal departments, such as engineering and quality assurance, and potentially external regulatory bodies if the defect poses a significant safety risk, as per Yokohama Rubber Company's internal guidelines and any applicable industry standards. This approach upholds the company's commitment to quality and safety, demonstrates accountability, and mitigates potential harm to consumers and the company's standing. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings or attempt to conceal the defect. Ignoring the quality control report or downplaying the severity of the issue would be a direct violation of internal quality management systems and ethical business practices. This failure to investigate and address the defect could lead to the distribution of substandard products, resulting in customer dissatisfaction, potential product recalls, legal liabilities, and severe damage to Yokohama Rubber Company's brand reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with production without a full understanding of the defect and its implications. This demonstrates a disregard for established quality control procedures and a lack of commitment to product safety, which is professionally unacceptable and ethically unsound. Professionals should approach such situations by adhering to a structured decision-making process. First, acknowledge and document the issue. Second, gather all relevant information and assess the potential impact. Third, consult internal policies and procedures, as well as any applicable external regulations. Fourth, involve appropriate stakeholders for consultation and decision-making. And finally, implement the chosen course of action with clear communication and follow-up. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and aligned with organizational objectives and regulatory requirements. Question 5. Cost-benefit analysis shows that using a slightly less durable, but significantly cheaper, raw material for a component in a new tire model could reduce production costs by 5% for Yokohama Rubber Company. However, internal testing indicates this material may degrade 10% faster under extreme conditions, potentially impacting long-term performance and safety in rare, severe use cases. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Yokohama Rubber Company employee responsible for this decision? Option A. Proceed with the cheaper raw material, as the cost savings are substantial and the risk of degradation is statistically low and only affects a small percentage of extreme use cases. Option B. Seek an opinion from an external consultant on the cost-benefit of using the cheaper material without fully disclosing the internal testing results regarding degradation. Option C. Proceed with the cheaper raw material, but implement a disclaimer in the product manual warning customers about potential degradation under extreme conditions. Option D. Reject the use of the cheaper raw material and maintain the current material specification to ensure consistent product quality and safety, even if it means foregoing the cost savings. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the cheaper raw material, as the cost savings are substantial and the risk of degradation is statistically low and only affects a small percentage of extreme use cases. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Yokohama Rubber Company employee because it requires balancing potential business gains against ethical considerations and adherence to the company's internal code of conduct, which is implicitly governed by Japanese corporate law and industry best practices. The employee must exercise sound judgment to avoid actions that could lead to reputational damage, legal repercussions, or a breach of trust with stakeholders. The core of the challenge lies in discerning when a proposed cost-saving measure crosses the line from prudent financial management into unethical or non-compliant territory. The correct approach involves prioritizing the integrity of the product and the safety of consumers above short-term cost reductions. This aligns with the fundamental ethical principles of corporate responsibility and the implicit legal obligations under Japanese law to produce safe and reliable goods. Specifically, it upholds the principle of customer first and the duty of care expected of a reputable manufacturer like Yokohama Rubber. This approach ensures that the company maintains its long-term reputation and avoids potential liabilities associated with substandard products. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without considering the potential impact on product quality or safety is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the company's ethical obligations and a potential violation of consumer protection principles, which are embedded within Japanese legal frameworks governing product safety and fair trade. Such an approach prioritizes profit over people, leading to potential legal penalties, loss of consumer trust, and severe damage to Yokohama Rubber's brand image. Another incorrect approach that involves seeking external validation for a questionable practice without fully disclosing the risks is also professionally unsound. This attempts to shift responsibility and may involve misrepresentation, undermining transparency and good corporate governance. It fails to address the root ethical concern and could lead to complicity in unethical behavior. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted evaluation. First, identify the core issue and the potential consequences, both positive and negative. Second, consult the company's internal code of conduct and relevant internal policies. Third, consider the broader ethical implications and the impact on all stakeholders, including customers, employees, and the company's reputation. If there is any doubt about the ethical or legal compliance of a proposed action, seeking guidance from senior management, legal counsel, or an ethics committee is paramount. This structured approach ensures that decisions are not only financially sound, but also ethically responsible and legally compliant. Question 6. The performance metrics show a significant downturn in a key product line for Yokohama Rubber Company, impacting overall profitability. The senior management team is concerned about the immediate market reaction and potential impact on share price. They are considering how to present this information to the public and investors. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional ethics for Yokohama Rubber Company? Option A. Present the full performance metrics, including the downturn, alongside a detailed explanation of the contributing factors and a clear, forward-looking strategy for addressing the issues and improving performance. Option B. Attribute the downturn solely to unforeseen global economic shifts and supply chain disruptions, without acknowledging any internal operational or strategic challenges that may have exacerbated the situation. Option C. Postpone the release of the full financial results until internal analyses can identify and articulate a more positive narrative, potentially involving restructuring or new product announcements to offset the negative news. Option D. Emphasize the positive performance of other product lines and growth areas, while briefly mentioning the downturn in the key product line as a minor, temporary setback, without extensive detail or a specific recovery plan. The correct answer is A. Present the full performance metrics, including the downturn, alongside a detailed explanation of the contributing factors and a clear, forward-looking strategy for addressing the issues and improving performance. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Yokohama Rubber Company, like any publicly traded entity, operates within a framework of disclosure requirements and fair market practices. Misrepresenting performance metrics, even with the intention of mitigating short-term negative market reactions, can lead to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of investor trust. The core of the challenge lies in discerning between legitimate business strategy and deceptive practices. The correct approach involves transparently communicating the performance metrics, including any negative aspects, while providing context and outlining a clear, actionable plan for improvement. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, such as those mandated by the relevant Japanese financial regulations and corporate disclosure guidelines. By being upfront about challenges and demonstrating a proactive strategy, Yokohama Rubber Company upholds its commitment to its stakeholders and maintains its integrity in the market. An incorrect approach that involves selectively highlighting positive metrics while downplaying or omitting negative ones is ethically unsound and likely violates disclosure regulations. This creates a misleading picture for investors and the market, potentially leading to misinformed investment decisions. Such an action could be construed as market manipulation or a breach of fiduciary duty. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay the release of performance metrics until a more favorable narrative can be constructed, is also problematic. While not outright misrepresentation, it can be seen as an attempt to artificially influence market perception and can lead to accusations of insider trading or market manipulation if information is selectively withheld. Regulatory bodies often have strict timelines for financial reporting to ensure timely and fair dissemination of information. A third incorrect approach, which is to attribute negative performance solely to external, uncontrollable factors without acknowledging any internal operational issues, is a failure of accountability. While external factors are often at play, a responsible company will also critically assess its own operations and strategies. This approach avoids necessary introspection and can hinder genuine improvement, while also being perceived as disingenuous by sophisticated market participants and regulators. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a thorough review of all available data, consultation with legal and compliance departments, and a commitment to transparency. Professionals should ask, does this communication present a fair and accurate picture of the company's performance and prospects? And does this approach comply with all applicable regulations and ethical standards? Prioritizing integrity and long-term stakeholder trust over short-term gains is paramount. Question 7. The audit findings indicate that certain production processes at the Yokohama Rubber Company have not consistently adhered to the specified quality control protocols, potentially impacting product integrity. As a quality assurance manager, what is the most appropriate course of action to address these findings? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the affected production processes to identify the root causes of the deviations, document findings, and propose corrective actions in consultation with relevant departments and senior management. Option B. Instruct the production teams to adjust their reporting to align with the expected quality control standards, without investigating the underlying process issues. Option C. Escalate the findings directly to external regulatory bodies without first conducting an internal investigation or informing senior management. Option D. Immediately implement cost-saving measures on the affected production lines to offset any potential financial impact of the deviations, deferring a detailed investigation until a later date. The correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the affected production processes to identify the root causes of the deviations, document findings, and propose corrective actions in consultation with relevant departments and senior management. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The audit findings suggest a deviation from established procedures, which could have implications for product quality, safety, and the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation, balancing the need to address the audit findings with the company's operational realities and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough, fact-based investigation into the root cause of the identified deviations. This includes gathering evidence, understanding the context of the deviations, and assessing their impact. Subsequently, it requires transparent communication with relevant stakeholders, including management and potentially regulatory bodies, if the deviations are significant and pose a risk. This approach aligns with principles of good corporate governance, ethical conduct, and regulatory adherence, ensuring that the Yokohama Rubber Company operates with integrity and maintains compliance with all applicable laws and standards. Specifically, it upholds the ethical duty to report and address non-compliance and the professional responsibility to ensure operational integrity. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost reduction without addressing the root cause of the deviations would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the potential long-term consequences of non-compliance, such as product recalls, fines, or reputational damage, and a violation of the ethical obligation to ensure product quality and safety. Another incorrect approach, which involves downplaying or concealing the audit findings to avoid negative repercussions, represents a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This action undermines transparency, obstructs accountability, and could lead to more significant problems down the line, potentially violating laws related to accurate reporting and corporate disclosure. A third incorrect approach, which involves blaming individual employees without a comprehensive investigation into systemic issues, is also professionally unsound. This fails to address the underlying causes of the deviations and can create a culture of fear rather than one of continuous improvement and accountability. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. This framework begins with a clear understanding of the facts and the regulatory landscape. It then involves assessing the risks and potential consequences of different actions, prioritizing ethical considerations and regulatory compliance over short-term gains is paramount. Open and honest communication with appropriate parties, coupled with a commitment to finding and implementing sustainable solutions, forms the basis of sound professional judgment. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that a new potential supplier for raw materials in Southeast Asia claims to have superior environmental sustainability practices and fair labor conditions. However, an internal preliminary review flags potential inconsistencies with these claims based on publicly available, albeit limited, information. As a Yokohama Rubber Company employee responsible for supplier selection, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with onboarding the supplier, as their stated practices align with Yokohama Rubber Company's stated commitment to sustainability and fair labor, and further investigation would delay securing a potentially cost-effective supply chain. Option B. Immediately reject the supplier due to the flagged inconsistencies, prioritizing risk avoidance over exploring a potentially beneficial partnership. Option C. Inform the supplier of the flagged inconsistencies and request they provide additional documentation to support their claims, but continue with the onboarding process while awaiting their response. Option D. Halt the onboarding process and initiate a comprehensive due diligence investigation, including independent verification of the supplier's environmental and labor practices, before making a final decision. The correct answer is A. Proceed with onboarding the supplier, as their stated practices align with Yokohama Rubber Company's stated commitment to sustainability and fair labor, and further investigation would delay securing a potentially cost-effective supply chain. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Yokohama Rubber Company employee due to the potential conflict between a business opportunity and the company's ethical obligations regarding responsible sourcing and environmental impact. The need for careful judgment arises from the imperative to balance commercial interests with adherence to the company's stated values and any applicable regulatory frameworks. Even if not explicitly detailed in the prompt, the expectation is to operate within a responsible corporate citizen framework. The correct approach involves proactively seeking internal guidance and conducting thorough due diligence. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance by not proceeding with a potentially problematic supplier without proper vetting. It aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and risk management, ensuring that Yokohama Rubber Company upholds its reputation and avoids potential legal or reputational damage. This approach prioritizes informed decision-making over expediency. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the supplier without further investigation, assuming the supplier's claims are accurate. This fails to acknowledge the potential risks associated with unverified claims regarding environmental practices and labor conditions. It could lead to association with unethical or illegal activities, violating corporate policy, and potentially exposing the company to significant reputational damage and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concerns raised by the internal team without proper consideration. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for potential ethical and compliance issues. It prioritizes short-term gains over long-term sustainability and responsible business practices, which can erode trust and damage the company's standing. A further incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the supplier's self-reported data without independent verification. While initial information is useful, a responsible company must conduct its own due diligence to confirm such claims, especially when dealing with sensitive areas like environmental impact and labor practices. This reliance on unverified information is a significant ethical and professional failing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, identify the potential ethical or compliance issue. Second, consult relevant internal policies and seek guidance from appropriate departments, e.g., legal, compliance, sustainability. Third, conduct thorough due diligence to verify any claims or concerns. Fourth, assess the risks and benefits of proceeding. And finally, make a decision that aligns with the company's values, ethical standards, and legal obligations. Question 9. The audit findings indicate that a senior manager at the Yokohama Rubber Company, who has recently been privy to confidential information regarding an upcoming product launch that is expected to significantly impact the company's stock price, has been making unusually large personal investments in a competitor's stock. The audit team is concerned this activity may constitute insider trading. What is the most appropriate immediate action for an employee who observes this pattern? Option A. Continue to monitor the senior manager's investments discreetly without reporting it to gather more definitive proof. Option B. Report the observed pattern of investment activity to the Yokohama Rubber Company's compliance department or legal counsel. Option C. Advise the senior manager directly that their investment activity appears questionable and could be perceived as insider trading. Option D. Discuss the observations with trusted colleagues to gauge their opinions on the senior manager's actions. The correct answer is B. Report the observed pattern of investment activity to the Yokohama Rubber Company's compliance department or legal counsel. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company policy and external regulatory expectations regarding the disclosure of sensitive information. The challenge lies in navigating the ambiguity of what constitutes material non-public information and the ethical obligation to prevent its misuse, while also adhering to the company's specific reporting procedures. Careful judgment is required to balance transparency with the need to protect proprietary information and avoid insider trading. The correct approach involves promptly reporting the observed potential insider trading activity to the designated compliance department or legal counsel within the Yokohama Rubber Company. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate that companies establish robust internal controls to prevent and detect insider trading. By escalating the issue internally, the employee ensures that the company can conduct a thorough investigation, take appropriate remedial actions, and fulfill its regulatory obligations to report suspicious activities to the relevant authorities if necessary. This proactive reporting demonstrates integrity and a commitment to upholding the law and company policy. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the observation, assuming it is not significant enough to warrant attention. This failure neglects the employee's ethical responsibility and potentially allows illegal activity to continue, exposing the Yokohama Rubber Company to severe regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the observation with colleagues outside of the official reporting channels. This could lead to the premature or unauthorized dissemination of sensitive information, potentially tipping off the individuals involved in the suspected insider trading and hindering any subsequent investigation. Furthermore, it could be construed as a breach of confidentiality and company policy. A third incorrect approach would be to attempt to investigate the matter independently without involving the appropriate internal departments. This could lead to an incomplete or biased investigation, potentially overlooking crucial evidence or inadvertently compromising the integrity of a formal inquiry. It also bypasses established company procedures designed to ensure thorough and compliant handling of such matters. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core issue and potential risks. Second, consult relevant company policies and codes of conduct, as well as any applicable regulatory guidelines. Third, prioritize reporting the concern through the designated internal channels, such as the compliance department or a confidential hotline. Fourth, avoid speculation or independent investigation that could compromise the process. Finally, cooperate fully with any internal or external investigations that may follow. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential discrepancy in the reported emissions data for a key manufacturing process at the Yokohama Rubber Company, which may not align with the latest environmental regulations. Option A. Ignore the alert, assuming it is a temporary system error that will resolve itself. Option B. Immediately report the discrepancy to the company's designated compliance officer or legal department for investigation and guidance. Option C. Discuss the potential data issue with other engineers in the department to gauge their opinion on its significance. Option D. Attempt to adjust the data manually to bring it within the expected range before reporting. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the discrepancy to the company's designated compliance officer or legal department for investigation and guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company directives and external regulatory requirements. The core difficulty lies in ensuring compliance with both while maintaining operational efficiency and ethical conduct. Careful judgment is required to navigate situations where information might be incomplete or ambiguous, and the employee must prioritize actions that uphold regulatory standards above all else. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the identified discrepancy to the designated compliance officer or legal department. This is the most appropriate professional action because it adheres strictly to the principle of regulatory priority. The Yokohama Rubber Company, like any entity operating within a regulated industry, is bound by specific laws and guidelines. When a monitoring system flags a potential breach, the immediate and mandatory step is to involve the internal experts responsible for interpreting and enforcing these regulations. This ensures that any action taken is informed by a thorough understanding of the applicable legal framework and company policy, preventing potential violations and mitigating risks. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to resolve the discrepancy independently without consulting the compliance department. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the established channels for regulatory oversight and could lead to misinterpretation of the monitoring system's output or the relevant regulations. Such an action risks exacerbating a potential compliance issue or even creating a new one by taking unauthorized corrective measures. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the alert from the monitoring system, assuming it is a minor glitch or an error. This is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. Regulatory frameworks often mandate proactive identification and reporting of potential noncompliance. Ignoring such alerts demonstrates a disregard for the company's legal obligations and a failure to exercise due diligence, which can have significant legal and reputational consequences for the Yokohama Rubber Company. A third incorrect approach would be to discuss the alert with colleagues outside of the compliance or legal department before reporting it. This could lead to the spread of incomplete or inaccurate information, potentially creating internal panic or influencing decision-making based on speculation rather than expert advice. It also risks breaching confidentiality if the information is sensitive. A professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear hierarchy of actions. First, identify and understand the potential issue. Second, consult internal policies and regulatory guidelines to assess the severity and nature of the potential breach. Third, immediately report the issue to the designated compliance or legal authority within the Yokohama Rubber Company. And fourth, follow their guidance for resolution. This structured approach ensures that all actions are compliant, ethical, and in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders. Question 11. System analysis indicates that a new marketing campaign for the Yokohama Rubber Company's latest tire model has been approved internally. However, during a review of the campaign materials, you notice that a specific claim made about the tire's performance in wet conditions appears to contradict a recent advisory issued by the relevant regulatory body concerning tire safety standards. What is the most appropriate course of action for you to take? Option A. Immediately halt the marketing campaign and inform your direct supervisor about the potential regulatory conflict, requesting guidance on how to proceed. Option B. Ignore the discrepancy, as marketing claims are often subject to interpretation, and the regulatory advisory may not be strictly applicable to this specific product. Option C. Proceed with the marketing campaign as approved, assuming the internal approval process has already vetted all regulatory compliance. Option D. Modify the marketing claim yourself to align with your understanding of the regulatory advisory, without consulting anyone further. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the marketing campaign as approved, assuming the internal approval process has already vetted all regulatory compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company directives and external regulatory requirements. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring compliance with the specific regulations governing the company's operations within its jurisdiction, while also upholding ethical business practices. Careful judgment is required to navigate situations where a direct order might inadvertently lead to a breach of these regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to the established regulatory framework. This means that when an internal directive appears to conflict with or potentially violate a regulation, the employee must escalate the issue through appropriate channels. This approach is correct because it upholds the legal and ethical obligations of the Yokohama Rubber Company. Specifically, it aligns with the principle of regulatory compliance, which is paramount in any business operation. By seeking clarification and ensuring that actions are in line with the law, the employee protects both themselves and the company from potential penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and adherence to the governing laws of the jurisdiction. An incorrect approach would be to blindly follow the directive without considering its regulatory implications. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal framework. Such an action could lead to direct violations of regulations, exposing the Yokohama Rubber Company to fines, sanctions, and legal action. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the directive and act solely on personal interpretation of regulations without proper consultation. This could lead to misinterpretations, unintended noncompliance, or operational disruption, and fails to acknowledge the company's internal processes for addressing such conflicts. Finally, an approach that involves attempting to circumvent or obscure the regulatory issue would be a severe ethical and legal breach, demonstrating a lack of integrity and a willingness to engage in potentially fraudulent activities. The professional decision-making process in similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the internal directive and the relevant regulations. Second, identify any potential conflicts or ambiguities. Third, if a conflict is identified, consult internal compliance officers or legal counsel for guidance. Fourth, document all communications and decisions. Finally, ensure that all actions taken are demonstrably compliant with both internal policies and external regulations. Question 12. Process analysis reveals that a Yokohama Rubber Company production facility in Japan is experiencing an increase in a specific type of industrial waste. The current disposal method, while cost-effective, is nearing its regulatory limit for the volume of this waste that can be processed annually under existing environmental permits. A production manager is concerned about meeting upcoming targets and is considering alternative, less regulated disposal methods to avoid potential production slowdowns or increased costs associated with compliant disposal. Which of the following actions best demonstrates professional responsibility and adherence to regulatory frameworks for Yokohama Rubber Company? Option A. Explore and utilize disposal services that are less expensive and appear to have fewer stringent regulations, even if their compliance status is not fully verified. Option B. Immediately investigate and implement a new, compliant disposal method for the industrial waste, consulting with the company's environmental health and safety A's, department and relevant Japanese environmental authorities to ensure full adherence to all applicable laws and guidelines. Option C. Discreetly seek out informal disposal channels that are not officially monitored by environmental agencies to avoid triggering any regulatory scrutiny. Option D. Continue with the current disposal method until a formal notice of violation is received from regulatory bodies, at which point the company can then address the issue. The correct answer is B. Immediately investigate and implement a new, compliant disposal method for the industrial waste, consulting with the company's environmental health and safety A's, department and relevant Japanese environmental authorities to ensure full adherence to all applicable laws and guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Yokohama Rubber Company employee due to the potential conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to meet production targets with the imperative to adhere to environmental regulations, specifically concerning waste disposal. Misjudging this balance can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement compliance solutions that do not unduly hinder operational efficiency. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification and guidance from the relevant internal departments and external regulatory bodies. This demonstrates a commitment to understanding and complying with environmental laws. By engaging with the Environmental Health and Safety A's department and consulting the official guidelines of the relevant Japanese environmental authorities, the employee ensures that any proposed solution is legally sound and ethically responsible. This proactive stance mitigates risk and upholds Yokohama Rubber Company's commitment to sustainable practices. An incorrect approach of simply disposing of waste in the most cost-effective manner, without verifying its compliance with environmental regulations, is a direct violation of environmental laws. This disregards the legal framework governing waste management and can result in fines and legal action against the company. Another incorrect approach, that of delaying the decision and hoping the issue resolves itself, is irresponsible and potentially exacerbates the problem. This inaction can lead to accumulating non-compliant waste, increasing the risk of detection and more severe penalties. Finally, an approach that involves attempting to conceal the waste or misrepresent its nature to avoid scrutiny is unethical and illegal, constituting fraud and a serious breach of trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue and its potential regulatory implications. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 3. Seeking expert advice from designated departments e.g. A's legal. 4. Evaluating potential solutions against compliance requirements and ethical standards. 5. Implementing the chosen solution with proper documentation and oversight. Question 13. Upon reviewing your employment contract with the Yokohama Rubber Company, you notice a clause regarding the disclosure of outside business activities. You have recently been offered an opportunity to invest in and advise a startup company that manufactures specialized industrial lubricants, a sector that has some overlap with the Yokohama Rubber Company's operations, though the startup primarily targets a different regional market. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Discuss the opportunity with trusted colleagues within the Yokohama Rubber Company to gauge their opinion before making a decision. Option B. Immediately disclose your involvement with the startup to your direct manager and the company's compliance department, seeking their guidance on how to proceed. Option C. Proceed with the investment and advisory role, assuming that since the startup targets a different region, it does not pose a conflict of interest. Option D. Invest in the startup, but refrain from any advisory role to minimize potential conflicts. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose your involvement with the startup to your direct manager and the company's compliance department, seeking their guidance on how to proceed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between personal financial interests and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in navigating situations where an employee's outside activities could be perceived as, or actually become, a conflict of interest, potentially impacting fair competition, proprietary information, or the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to uphold the Yokohama Rubber Company's commitment to integrity and adherence to all applicable regulations. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the potential conflict to the appropriate internal authority at the Yokohama Rubber Company and seeking guidance. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and allows the company to assess the situation objectively, implement necessary safeguards, or provide clear direction. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees, which often mandate disclosure of potential conflicts of interest to prevent impropriety and maintain trust. While specific regulations for the Yokohama Rubber Company's hiring assessment test are not provided, the principle of disclosure is a universal ethical standard in professional environments. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the outside business venture without informing the Yokohama Rubber Company. This failure to disclose is a significant ethical lapse and could violate internal company policies designed to prevent conflicts of interest. It creates an environment where decisions might be influenced by personal gain rather than the best interests of the Yokohama Rubber Company, potentially leading to reputational damage or even legal repercussions if proprietary information or unfair competitive practices are involved. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because the outside venture is in a different geographical market, it poses no conflict. This overlooks the interconnectedness of global business and the potential for indirect impacts, such as the diversion of resources, expertise, or even the perception of favorability. The Yokohama Rubber Company has a right to expect its employees to act solely in its best interest during their employment. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the outside venture to colleagues rather than reporting it through official channels. This bypasses established procedures for conflict of interest management and can create an atmosphere of secrecy, undermining the company's efforts to maintain a transparent and ethical workplace. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and seeking clarification when in doubt. This involves understanding the company's code of conduct and conflict of interest policies, proactively identifying potential conflicts, and reporting them to the designated department or individual for review and guidance. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that candidates for the Yokohama Rubber Company hiring assessment test are expected to demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the assessment's governing framework. If a candidate, in their response, inadvertently references a regulatory principle from a different country's employment law while attempting to answer a question about the assessment's compliance requirements, which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response? Option A. The candidate's response should be considered acceptable as long as the reference principle is generally sound and relevant to employment law. Option B. The candidate should be evaluated solely on the accuracy of the referenced regulatory principle, regardless of its jurisdictional origin. Option C. The candidate should be penalized for introducing external information, even if it is factually correct, as it distracts from the core assessment objectives. Option D. The candidate should be assessed on their ability to strictly adhere to the specified jurisdiction and guidelines of the Yokohama Rubber Company hiring assessment test, recognizing that deviations indicate a failure to follow instructions. The correct answer is B. The candidate should be evaluated solely on the accuracy of the referenced regulatory principle, regardless of its jurisdictional origin. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company directives and external regulatory requirements. Navigating such situations requires a deep understanding of the applicable regulatory framework to ensure compliance and uphold ethical standards. The core of the challenge lies in prioritizing adherence to the law and established guidelines over potentially conflicting internal policies or personal interpretations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the Yokohama Rubber Company hiring assessment test. This means strictly adhering to the defined jurisdiction, which in this case is implicitly the framework of the hiring assessment itself, and any associated legal or ethical guidelines that govern such assessments. This approach is correct because it ensures that the assessment process is conducted fairly, transparently, and in accordance with the established rules, thereby protecting both the integrity of the hiring process and the company from potential legal or reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to professionalism and ethical conduct by placing paramount importance on the governing framework. An incorrect approach would be to deviate from the specified jurisdiction, for example, by referencing regulations from other countries or using generic regulatory terms when a specific jurisdiction is implied by the assessment's context. This is a regulatory failure because it violates the explicit instruction to adhere to the specified framework, undermining the validity and fairness of the assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to mix multiple jurisdictions, which directly contravenes the requirement for strict jurisdiction compliance and introduces an unmanageable level of complexity and potential for error. Furthermore, focusing on mathematical calculations or complex numerical problems when the assessment is designed to test conceptual understanding or application of the topic without such calculations would also be an incorrect approach, as it fails to address the intended learning or evaluation objectives. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the explicit instructions and constraints of any given task or assessment. This involves carefully reading and internalizing all requirements, especially those related to jurisdiction, scope, and methodology. When faced with ambiguity or potential conflicts, the professional should seek clarification rather than making assumptions. In the context of an assessment, this means prioritizing the stated rules of the assessment above all else. Ethical considerations should always guide decision-making, ensuring that actions are fair, honest, and compliant with all applicable standards. Question 15. The control framework reveals that the Yokohama Rubber Company is considering a new marketing campaign for its latest tire model, emphasizing a purported 15% improvement in fuel efficiency. However, internal testing data shows a range of results, with some tests indicating a 12% improvement and others showing only a 7% improvement, depending on driving conditions. Marketing department is eager to use the 15% improvement figure to maximize impact, believing the Yokohama Rubber Company's brand reputation will lend credibility to the claim. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional, ethical, and regulatory standards for the Yokohama Rubber Company? Option A. Proceed with the 15% improvement claim, but include a small disclaimer in the fine print that the actual improvement may vary. Option B. Postpone the marketing campaign until further testing can definitively prove a consistent 15% improvement across all driving conditions. Option C. Use the 15% improvement figure in the marketing campaign, relying on the strength of the Yokohama Rubber Company's brand to assure consumers of its accuracy. Option D. Develop marketing materials that accurately reflect the range of fuel efficiency improvements observed in testing, perhaps highlighting the potential for up to 15% improvement under optimal conditions, while also mentioning the average or typical improvement. The correct answer is C. Use the 15% improvement figure in the marketing campaign, relying on the strength of the Yokohama Rubber Company's brand to assure consumers of its accuracy. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to leverage its brand reputation for financial gain and the ethical imperative to ensure that such leveraging does not mislead consumers or misrepresent the product's capabilities. The Yokohama Rubber Company, like any reputable firm, must navigate the fine line between marketing innovation and maintaining consumer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any promotional activities are grounded in factual accuracy and do not exploit the company's established goodwill through deceptive practices. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based assessment of the proposed marketing campaigns, claims against the actual performance data, and technical specifications of the tires. This approach prioritizes transparency and factual accuracy, aligning with the principles of fair advertising and consumer protection. Specifically, it requires the marketing team to collaborate with the R&D and quality assurance departments to validate any performance enhancements or new features being highlighted. This ensures that the marketing message is not only compelling, but also truthful and verifiable, thereby upholding the company's integrity and adhering to any applicable advertising standards or consumer protection laws that prohibit misleading representations. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the marketing campaign based solely on anecdotal evidence or the assumption that the Yokohama Rubber Company's brand name alone guarantees superior performance. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory and ethical obligation to substantiate marketing claims. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit any potential limitations or trade-offs associated with the new tire technology in favor of a purely positive portrayal. This constitutes a form of misrepresentation, as it creates an incomplete and potentially misleading picture for consumers. A third incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market over accuracy, rushing the campaign without adequate verification of its claims. This demonstrates a disregard for consumer welfare and regulatory compliance, potentially leading to reputational damage and legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core objective of the marketing campaign, and then rigorously evaluating proposed strategies against established ethical principles and regulatory requirements. This involves seeking diverse perspectives from relevant departments, demanding verifiable data to support all claims, and considering the potential impact on consumer perception and trust. A commitment to transparency and accuracy should guide all stages of campaign development and execution. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that a customer has submitted an informal online forum post alleging a potential performance issue with a specific tire model manufactured by the Yokohama Rubber Company. The post is detailed but lacks direct evidence of a widespread defect. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for a Yokohama Rubber Company employee who discovers this post? Option A. Attempt to contact the customer directly through the forum to gather more information and offer a personal resolution to the alleged issue. Option B. Immediately initiate a formal internal investigation by reporting the customer's post to the relevant quality assurance and product safety departments within the Yokohama Rubber Company, requesting a review of the specific tire model. Option C. Archive the forum post for future reference but take no immediate action, as the report is informal and lacks concrete evidence of a defect. Option D. Publicly respond to the forum post, assuring all readers that the Yokohama Rubber Company's products are of the highest quality and that no such issues exist. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate a formal internal investigation by reporting the customer's post to the relevant quality assurance and product safety departments within the Yokohama Rubber Company, requesting a review of the specific tire model. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company directives and the broader ethical considerations of product safety and consumer trust. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the immediate pressure to address a reported issue with the need for a thorough, compliant, and ethically sound investigation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any response upholds the Yokohama Rubber Company's commitment to quality and safety, while also adhering to relevant regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a systematic and transparent process of internal reporting and investigation, prioritizing data integrity and regulatory compliance. This approach is best professional practice because it ensures that potential product defects are identified and addressed through established channels, allowing for proper risk assessment and mitigation. It aligns with the ethical obligation to consumers to provide safe products and with the regulatory requirement to report and rectify issues that could impact public safety. By following internal procedures and engaging relevant departments, the Yokohama Rubber Company can ensure a comprehensive and compliant resolution. An incorrect approach that involves immediately attempting to downplay or conceal the reported issue without proper investigation is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the ethical duty of care to consumers and could lead to significant regulatory penalties if the issue is later discovered. It also undermines the integrity of the Yokohama Rubber Company's quality control processes. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately escalate the issue to external regulatory bodies without first conducting an internal review and attempting to resolve it through established company channels, can be premature and disruptive. While transparency with regulators is important, bypassing internal reporting mechanisms can create unnecessary alarm and may not be the most efficient way to address a potential issue, especially if it turns out to be a minor or isolated incident that can be resolved internally. This approach can also strain relationships with regulatory bodies if used inappropriately. A further incorrect approach, which is to ignore the report altogether due to its informal nature, is a severe ethical and professional failure. All credible reports of potential product issues, regardless of their initial format, warrant attention and investigation to ensure consumer safety and maintain the company's reputation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Acknowledging and documenting all reports of potential issues. 2. Following established internal reporting procedures to ensure the issue is brought to the attention of the appropriate departments, e.g., quality control, legal, R&D. 3. Conducting a thorough, objective, and data-driven investigation to determine the validity and scope of the reported issue. 4. Collaborating with relevant internal stakeholders to develop and implement a corrective action plan if necessary. 5. Engaging with external regulatory bodies as required by law and company policy based on the findings of the investigation. Question 17. Assessment of how a candidate for a position at the Yokohama Rubber Company should handle a situation where they discover that the hiring manager for their desired role is a close personal friend from university. Option A. Only mention the relationship to the hiring manager after accepting an offer if one is extended. Option B. Remain silent about the relationship unless specifically asked about it during the interview process. Option C. Proactively disclose the personal relationship to the Yokohama Rubber Company's Human Resources Department and the hiring manager. Option D. Assume the personal relationship will not impact the hiring decision and proceed with the interview as normal. The correct answer is C. Proactively disclose the personal relationship to the Yokohama Rubber Company's Human Resources Department and the hiring manager. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a candidate applying to the Yokohama Rubber Company by requiring them to navigate potential conflicts of interest and uphold ethical standards in a business context. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional integrity and adherence to company policy. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are made impartially and in the best interest of the Yokohama Rubber Company, rather than being influenced by personal connections. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the personal relationship to the appropriate internal authority within the Yokohama Rubber Company. This demonstrates transparency and allows the company to manage any potential conflicts of interest effectively. This aligns with general ethical principles of disclosure and good corporate governance, which are implicitly expected in any reputable hiring process. By informing the company, the candidate enables them to implement safeguards, such as assigning the candidate to a different team or project, or ensuring that the hiring manager is aware and can maintain objectivity. This proactive disclosure upholds the candidate's integrity and respects the Yokohama Rubber Company's commitment to fair and unbiased hiring practices. An incorrect approach would be to remain silent about the relationship. This failure to disclose is a breach of ethical conduct and potentially company policy. It creates an undisclosed conflict of interest, undermining the fairness of the hiring process and potentially leading to perceptions of favoritism or bias. This could damage the candidate's reputation and the Yokohama Rubber Company's internal trust. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the relationship if directly asked. While better than complete silence, this is still reactive rather than proactive. It suggests a reluctance to be fully transparent and may still leave the Yokohama Rubber Company unaware of a potential issue until it is more difficult to manage. Professional decision-making in such situations should follow a framework of transparency, integrity, and adherence to established company policies. When in doubt about a potential conflict of interest, the professional standard is to err on the side of disclosure and seek guidance from the relevant internal stakeholders within the Yokohama Rubber Company. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company when an internal directive appears to conflict with the established regulatory framework governing the company's operations? Option A. Attempt to subtly modify the process to appear compliant with regulations without fundamentally changing the approach dictated by the internal directive. Option B. Proceed with the internal directive, assuming it has been vetted for regulatory compliance by management. Option C. Prioritize adherence to the established regulatory framework, seeking clarification and ensuring internal processes align with external requirements. Option D. Ignore the potential regulatory conflict and proceed with the internal directive, hoping the issue does not arise. The correct answer is C. Prioritize adherence to the established regulatory framework, seeking clarification and ensuring internal processes align with external requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company directives and external regulatory requirements. Navigating such situations requires a strong understanding of compliance obligations and ethical conduct. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its overarching legal and ethical responsibilities, particularly when those needs might push the boundaries of acceptable practice. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions made do not expose the Yokohama Rubber Company to legal penalties, reputational damage, or ethical breaches. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to the specified regulatory framework for the Yokohama Rubber Company's operations. This means that any internal policy or directive that conflicts with these regulations must be addressed by seeking clarification and ensuring compliance. This approach is professionally sound because it upholds the company's legal obligations and ethical standards. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to operating within the bounds of the law, which is a fundamental requirement for any business. By seeking to align internal processes with external regulations, the employee acts as a responsible steward of the company's compliance posture, preventing potential violations and associated repercussions. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the integrity and sustainability of the Yokohama Rubber Company. An incorrect approach would be to disregard the potential regulatory implications and proceed solely based on the internal directive. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence regarding external compliance obligations. It risks violating the regulatory framework, which could lead to fines, sanctions, or legal action against the Yokohama Rubber Company. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to circumvent or subtly alter the process to appear compliant without genuinely adhering to the spirit or letter of the regulations. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to engage in deceptive practices, which is ethically reprehensible and can lead to severe consequences if discovered. A third incorrect approach might be to ignore the directive and the potential regulatory issue altogether, hoping it resolves itself. This passive stance is also professionally unacceptable as it abdicates responsibility and allows a potential compliance gap to persist, leaving the Yokohama Rubber Company vulnerable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts between internal directives and external regulations. This should be followed by a thorough review of the relevant regulatory framework to understand the specific requirements. If a conflict is identified, the next step is to seek clarification from appropriate internal departments, e.g., legal, compliance, and if necessary, escalate the issue to ensure the company's actions are fully compliant. This process emphasizes a proactive, informed, and ethically grounded approach to problem solving. Question 19. Implementation of a new sales strategy for the Yokohama Rubber Company in a key international market has led to a potential major contract. During negotiations, a prospective client expresses strong interest but indicates that their internal procurement policies require them to receive a performance incentive that is not publicly disclosed and is not a standard part of the Yokohama Rubber Company's pricing model. The client suggests this incentive would be a significant percentage of the contract value to be paid directly to an individual within their organization. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Yokohama Rubber Company representative? Option A. Suggest that the Yokohama Rubber Company's product specifications can be slightly adjusted to meet the client's perceived needs, even if these adjustments are not technically necessary, to justify a higher initial price that can then absorb the incentive. Option B. Propose a significant but officially documented discount on the total contract value that is within the Yokohama Rubber Company's approved discount margins, and inform the client that this is the maximum concession available. Option C. Agree to the client's request for the undisclosed incentive, as securing such a large contract is crucial for the Yokohama Rubber Company's market growth, and the incentive can be disguised as a legitimate operational expense. Option D. Politely decline the request for the undisclosed incentive, explaining that the Yokohama Rubber Company adheres to transparent and ethical business practices and cannot offer such payments, while reiterating the value proposition of their products and services. The correct answer is D. Politely decline the request for the undisclosed incentive, explaining that the Yokohama Rubber Company adheres to transparent and ethical business practices and cannot offer such payments, while reiterating the value proposition of their products and services. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Yokohama Rubber Company employee due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a significant contract can tempt individuals to overlook or rationalize potentially unethical shortcuts. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation, ensuring that the company's long-term reputation and legal standing are prioritized over short-term gains. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency and ethical negotiation. This means clearly communicating the Yokohama Rubber Company's pricing structure and product specifications without any misrepresentation. It also entails a willingness to walk away from a deal if the client's demands are unreasonable or suggest unethical practices, such as demanding undisclosed rebates or preferential treatment that violates fair competition principles. This approach aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and ethical business practices, which are implicitly expected in any professional hiring assessment, even without specific jurisdictional regulations being cited. It upholds the integrity of the Yokohama Rubber Company and fosters sustainable business relationships built on trust. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's request for undisclosed rebates. This action could be construed as a form of bribery or an attempt to circumvent fair pricing regulations, potentially leading to legal repercussions for both the employee and the Yokohama Rubber Company. It erodes trust with other clients who are subject to standard pricing and damages the company's reputation for fair dealing. Another incorrect approach would be to misrepresent the technical specifications of the Yokohama Rubber Company's products to meet the client's perceived needs. This is a form of deception that could lead to product failure, customer dissatisfaction, and significant liability for the company. It violates the fundamental ethical obligation to provide accurate information about goods and services. A third incorrect approach would be to offer a special discount that is not formally documented or approved through the Yokohama Rubber Company's established channels. This creates an opaque financial transaction that could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal revenue or engage in illicit practices. It bypasses internal controls and exposes the company to financial and reputational risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential ethical dilemmas and conflicts of interest. 2. Understanding relevant company policies and any applicable industry standards. 3. Seeking guidance from supervisors or legal/compliance departments when in doubt. And 4. Making decisions that uphold the highest standards of integrity, even if it means foregoing a short-term business opportunity. Question 20. The audit findings indicate that a specific internal policy at the Yokohama Rubber Company regarding the retention period for customer contact information is shorter than the minimum period mandated by the applicable data protection regulations. This discrepancy could lead to the premature deletion of data that is legally required to be retained. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Yokohama Rubber Company to take in response to these audit findings? Option A. Initiate a review of the data protection regulations to determine if the company can seek an exemption or a less stringent interpretation that aligns with the current internal policy. Option B. Implement a temporary workaround by manually flagging customer data that falls within the regulatory retention period, allowing it to be retained beyond the internal policy's limit without formally updating the policy. Option C. Immediately revise the internal policy to align with the minimum retention period stipulated by the data protection regulations and ensure all relevant departments are informed and retrain staff on the updated procedure. Option D. Continue to follow the existing internal policy, as it is a company-established guideline, and monitor for any direct complaints from customers regarding data access. The correct answer is C. Immediately revise the internal policy to align with the minimum retention period stipulated by the data protection regulations, and ensure all relevant departments are informed and retrain staff on the updated procedure. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at the Yokohama Rubber Company due to the potential conflict between internal company policy and external regulatory requirements, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive customer data. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring compliance with data protection laws while maintaining operational efficiency and customer trust. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands without compromising either legal obligations or business interests. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework, specifically the data protection laws applicable to the Yokohama Rubber Company's operations, over internal policy when there is a conflict. This is because regulatory requirements are legally binding and carry significant penalties for noncompliance, including fines and reputational damage. Adhering to the law ensures that customer data is handled ethically and securely, protecting individuals' privacy rights and maintaining the company's integrity. This approach demonstrates a commitment to legal and ethical conduct, which is paramount in any business operation, especially when dealing with sensitive information. An incorrect approach would be to strictly adhere to the internal company policy, even if it contradicts the regulatory framework. This failure stems from a misunderstanding or disregard for the supremacy of law, Regulatory bodies have the authority to enforce compliance, and internal policies cannot override legal mandates. Following such an approach would expose the Yokohama Rubber Company to legal repercussion, including potential lawsuits and regulatory sanctions, and would undermine customer confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to seek a compromise that dilutes the protective measures mandated by the regulatory framework. A compromise can be valuable in business. It is unacceptable when it involves circumventing legal requirements designed to protect individuals' data. This approach demonstrates a lack of commitment to robust data protection and could still lead to breaches of privacy and legal violations, albeit perhaps on a smaller scale. A further incorrect approach would be to ignore the audit findings altogether, assuming they are minor or can be resolved internally without external consultation. This is a critical failure in risk management and compliance. Audit findings, especially those related to regulatory adherence, signal potential vulnerabilities that must be addressed proactively. Ignoring them can lead to the escalation of issues and more severe consequences down the line. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. When an audit reveals a discrepancy between internal practices and external regulations, the immediate step should be to consult the relevant legal and compliance departments. These departments can provide expert guidance on interpreting and applying the law. The decision should always be to align company practices with the most stringent requirements, which in this case would be the regulatory framework. This ensures that the company operates within legal boundaries and upholds its ethical responsibilities.